I'm Jeb Butler with Butler Law Firm.
And I'm Lyndall with the Butler Law Firm.
What kind of case are we here to talk about today?
We're here about a pedestrian accident. Our client was crossing the street in front of the state capitol on a busy Tuesday morning, and unfortunately was hit by a car. So we got the case in. We heard those basic facts, and we thought, wow, this is a pretty good case. And then we got the police report, and the police report was not so good. It put all of the fault on our client. It didn't cite her per se, but it definitely blamed her.
So she didn't get a ticket, but the officer had, I think, checked a little box that suspected at fault.
Yes.
For our client. Sometimes lawyers will stop there, but it's usually not smart to do so, particularly in a case like this where we had a client who told a reasonable story and could tell us what happened and why. It's important in those circumstances to remember that the officer is not always right. And Morgan, who principally handled this case, did some good work figuring out why the officer might have messed this one up.
Yeah, so the first thing I did was I contacted the officer. I asked him, what did you do? Who did you speak with? And he basically told us, I spoke to the at-fault driver, and I spoke to this one witness whose name was on the accident report. In speaking to our client, she told us she was there with a group of employees or co-workers. So we knew that there was a ton of other witnesses that the police officer hadn't spoken to, and just kind of completed his investigation by speaking to the at-fault driver and one witness. Didn't even speak to our client. And
that was it, right?
Yeah.
The investigation was, I talked to two people.
Yeah.
And one of them was the person who hit your client.
Yeah, and didn't even speak to our client. While she was taken away in an ambulance, didn't make any follow-up attempt to call her or any of that. So,
sometimes they'll go to a good officer will sometimes go to the hospital and ask somebody, what happened once they're stable, but didn't happen here.
So how do you find out what happened in this case? How do you get the proof?
So we first reached, the first witness we reached out to was that one, I guess I'll call her a bad witness, on the police report. Reached out to her, kind of asked her some questions, and I figured out that she didn't have the best angle to see the accident. Rather than being, straight on, looking directly at it, she was behind and down the street, kind of looking up and towards it.
It was a pretty steep angle, right?
Yeah, it was definitely a really steep angle. You're like walking down the sidewalk and you see the accident up ahead of you, kind of thing, rather than looking, straight down it.
Right.
We spoke to her. I got her to sign an affidavit that basically said, I was down the street, marking her location, so we had a better idea of a better idea of where she was. We then started.
What's an affidavit?
So an affidavit is essentially just a sworn statement. It's a written statement. It can say anything you want it to say. I was here, I was holding a plate, I saw the accident. I didn't see the accident. I was standing here when I saw the accident. What we did with this witness is we took Google Maps, actually I think it was like a satellite image of the street, kind of from a weird angle, but gave you a pretty good angle of the street. And we had her mark with an X where she was standing, and then mark with an O where the accident occurred.
Right.
So we had her mark her position with an X and mark the position of the accident with the O, and just from doing that you could see she was quite a bit far down the street from the accident. I then called some of
and this is important because for a witness to judge like who's at fault in a pedestrian accident, the central question is basically, two questions. Was the pedestrian reasonable in deciding to cross the street? And did the car have a chance to stop? Or were they just like driving too fast, not paying attention, and just refused to change lanes, that kind of thing? So the angle matters quite a bit.
Yeah.
Because if you're standing like looking perpendicular to the street, you can judge what kind of distance the pedestrian has. But if you're way down and you're looking down a long street, it's hard for you to see how far away the car is, or even how fast the car is going when the pedestrian decides to walk.
Yeah.
Now I interrupted you. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
So after we got that affidavit, we spoke to a couple of our clients' coworkers, and everybody basically had the same story. Miss Deal went across the street to go back to the bus that they had arrived on to grab some things because the line to get into the Capitol was so long. So after she's off the bus, Miss Deal stops. She looks across to make sure she can get across the street, and then proceeds to go. And basically, both witnesses that we spoke to and then subsequently got affidavits from said that the car came out of nowhere, was speeding, and honked at Miss Deal for like 3 to 5 seconds. And that's really important because it shows that the car, had the time to recognize that she was in front of them and potentially was about to hit the car, but didn't swerve. And our witnesses also testified that the car didn't do anything other than honk and hit their brakes after they collided with Miss Deal. So that was really
just rude. I mean,
yeah.
It's a multi-lane, 3 lanes,
four lanes.
4 lanes. The car is in one of the 2 center lanes, if I remember it right.
Yes, yeah.
So there's like a lane on either side, and the witnesses are like, yes, it could have, and it just doesn't, and instead rams her,
Yeah.
and that is not allowed. So we were able, after Morgan, she's very graciously said we throughout this talk, but really had a limited role in drafting the affidavits and none in meeting with the witnesses. She went out and met with everybody, got their stories, and then committed it, under oath in writing in what we call an affidavit. So that's a long answer, Mr. Kahn, to your question about where the proof came from.
No.
So was Miss Deal in the crosswalk or outside the crosswalk?
So she was not in the crosswalk. She was what is commonly known as jaywalking, walking in between 2.
Well, I mean, maybe it's not. Jaywalking is like if it's she was not in a crosswalk, but she was being reasonable, so it's not really jaywalking.
So the statute
it's just not really in a crosswalk.
If you can cross a street safely, and you enter the roadway safely, you are allowed to do so outside of a crosswalk.
That's what's the statute?
The statute is a law. So the law in Georgia says that you don't per se have to be inside a crosswalk. You just need to make sure that you can safely cross the street before entering the street.
Which makes sense because there's not crosswalks everywhere. And if you're standing in a street and you look both ways and there's not a car coming that you could reasonably expect might hit you, then you shouldn't have to walk, a half mile down the road to get to a crosswalk. You can go as long as you're acting reasonably. That's what the law is, and that's what we think Ms. Deal was doing.
Yeah, so our witness affidavits supported that. They said, Ms. Deal waited for some cars to pass and then proceeded to enter the roadway. And then the car that hit her came out of nowhere and was speeding. So it supported everything that our client had told us, and supported that she wasn't jaywalking, but was walking lawfully within the statute. So that helped with the issue that she was not within a crosswalk when this incident occurred. So we got all that together and we drafted a demand and sent a demand package to the liability insurer for $100,000. And I think they got back to us in like 2.5 weeks and accepted the demand. So that was great.
What kind of insurance is available in a case like this with a pedestrian in the car?
In addition to liability insurance, oftentimes UM coverage or UIM, which is uninsured motorist or underinsured motorist coverage, is available. So if you have an auto insurance policy and you have those coverages available to you, and you're in a pedestrian accident, there is some potential that you can recover under those policies in addition to a liability policy. So here we were able to cover
an important sort of thing to, in my view, pause on for a second, because a lot of people don't realize that. That if you're in a pedestrian accident, your automotive insurance can cover it. And that means the automotive insurance of the person who's at fault, which I think most people already understand, but also your own auto insurance, even though you weren't in a car, if you have what Morgan rightly calls UM or UIM coverage. And I wanted to pause also to say this. A lot of folks have that and don't know it. In the state of Georgia, any insurance company that sells you a car insurance policy, like the law requires you to have, must also offer UM insurance to you at the same time. And a lot of people check that box and just forget, and are pleasantly surprised later when a lawyer who's doing her or his homework goes out and finds that coverage.
Yeah, and on top of that, even if you yourself don't have an auto policy, if you live with a relative, there's some potential that you have what's called resident relative coverage under their UM or UIM policy. So there's that, and conversely, on the flip side, with liability coverage, if that driver also lives with a relative who has another auto policy, there's potentially some additional liability coverage under that. So it's important to get lawyers involved to uncover all of that insurance that's available to you, because at first glance it may look like there's only like state minimum coverage, $25,000, but you might have $100,000 worth of damages, and obviously $25,000 is not going to compensate you for what you've been hurt. So it's important to get a lawyer involved to be able to uncover all of that potential coverage for you.
What's the first thing that an injured pedestrian should do after an accident like this?
Well, the immediate first thing I think is get medical attention. If you're hit by a car and you're not in anything, chances are you're probably going to be pretty severely injured, and the chances that you have some internal injury is really increased. So one, go seek medical attention. After you've sought medical attention and are on the road to recovery, then reach out to an attorney. You do want to do that as quickly as possible. That might not be the day of, obviously for some many good reasons, but you do want to reach out as quickly as possible, because attorneys are able to get in, send what's called spoliation letters or do not destroy evidence letters, to preserve evidence that's out there and make sure that you can really show a jury the full picture 2 years down the road if and when the case has to go to trial.
The days matter. Some folks want to ask, well, okay, when's the deadline by which my case has to be filed? Statute of limitations is 2 years. What's the rush? And I can understand that question, but the rush is usually evidentiary, meaning it's driven by the need for evidence. And the clearest example is surveillance video. A lot of times you can find surveillance video from nearby businesses, sometimes even from somebody's Ring doorbell, or the Nest doorbell that records video, but that stuff doesn't last long. Typically it's recorded over in a matter of days, sometimes weeks. So that's a good reason to move fast on finding a lawyer, in addition to the insurance stuff that Morgan talked about, and of course witnesses. I mean, people are often strongly motivated to help when something's fresh in their minds, but that willingness to help can fade if you don't get to them fast enough.
What sets Butler Law Firm apart from other law firms who handle this type of work?
Mostly our good looks and charm.
Well, I was going to go a different route.
Okay, fine.
I think in this case, it really was a witness work, because as Jeb said, some people, or some law firms, I should say, when they got the accident report we got in this case, would have stopped there and cut the client loose and said, sorry, it looks like you're at fault, and we'll see you later. But as the evidence showed and as the results showed, if you do your work and speak to witnesses and get affidavits and collect the evidence that's necessary, you can disprove an accident report. That's not, it's not the truth. It's not the gospel. police officers that investigate accidents are human too. So sometimes what's in the report is just not accurate or not a full picture of what happened. And I think that was the case here, is we just didn't have a full picture. And that started with the fact that the officer only spoke to the at-fault driver and the one witness that was very far away from the accident when it occurred. So he didn't paint a full picture of the accident in the accident report. So to me, that's what sets Butler Law Firm apart, is the willingness to put the boots on the ground and get the evidence that you need to disprove a bad accident report.
I think that's absolutely right. I think most law firms would have abandoned the case upon seeing that little check mark in the police report that our client was suspected at fault. But Ms. Deal is now quite pleased with her $100,000 settlement in her pedestrian case, and so are we.